The thought of missing ingredients for a recipe strikes fear in the heart of anyone responsible for provisioning and cooking on a boat. After all, it's generally not possible to just quickly run to the grocery store. Hi, I'm Carolyn Sherlock. Substitutions are a part of cooking anywhere, but particularly on a boat. And today, I'll give a framework for knowing what substitutions will work for your recipes. This is the Boat Galley Podcast, the place for answers to your questions about the cruising lifestyle and living aboard. This episode of the Boat Galley Podcast is sponsored by Rain Man Water Makers and SeaTask. Rain Man Water Makers are capable of producing up to 37 gallons of fresh, clean drinking water per hour from seawater. Portable and installed models are available, all with off-the-shelf parts. Configurations are available in AC, 12-volt DC, and even a gasoline system, with new 2019 models being smaller, lighter, and quieter than ever. SeaTask is the premier U.S. facility for Rain Man Water Makers. Visit them at www.seataskgroup, that's SeaTaskGroup.com to learn more. On a boat, particularly if you're cruising outside the U.S., substitutions become a way of life. Whether it's because the last store you were at didn't stock an item, you didn't think you'd need it, or you're out and you just don't feel like making a trip to the store, the end result is the same. You need a substitute. I'll freely admit that I am not remotely a gourmet cook. I simply want to put something tasty and nutritious on the table for my family and friends. Mom taught me that substitutions fall into three categories: critical ingredients, role players, and optional ingredients. So let's look first at critical ingredients. Critical ingredients are those that are essential to a dish. For example, yeast for bread, baking powder for biscuits, eggs for omelets, and marshmallows for s'mores. For these, you need an exact substitute. Lacking an exact substitute for critical ingredients, you really can't make the dish. Instead, you need to find a recipe for something else that doesn't require the missing ingredient. Now, how about role players? Role players probably make up the bulk of ingredients in recipes, particularly in things other than baked goods. Role players are ingredients that fulfill a specific purpose, but the exact item isn't critical to the dish being successful. Some examples of role players would be ingredients that serve to add something like crunch or maybe another texture, or they thicken, or they're sweet, they add spiciness, they add tartness, maybe they add bulk, or they're a base to serve something else over. These are ingredients where you can be creative if you don't have something. The dish you create won't be identical to the original, but that's not the object. You're trying to make something that's good to eat, not an exact copy. The key here is to think about what purpose a particular ingredient has in a recipe, and to find something that you do have that will serve the exact same purpose. Let's take an example. Let's look at chili. Almost everybody's familiar with this. Now, a typical recipe might call for, say, ground beef, diced onions, oil to brown the beef and onions in, chopped green peppers, canned diced tomatoes, kidney beans, chili powder, and salt. Okay, the ground beef is protein and it provides some of the flavor. You can easily substitute ground turkey and add a bit of beef bouillon powder instead of the salt. Or you could use a can of roast beef, cut into bite-sized bits. Or if you have some beef stew meat, you could brown that and use it. I've even made chili using chicken, either canned or fresh. Now the diced onion adds flavor. Perhaps you could use green onion, dried onion, or onion powder, or even a spoonful of, say, onion soup mix. Now the oil to brown the meat. If you're using ground beef, you can use a little salt in the pan, which will draw the fat out of the meat to cook it in. Otherwise, you could use a non-stick cooking spray, butter, or margarine, or a different type of oil. Green peppers provide flavor and also a different texture. You could use a can of chopped green chilies or even a small can of mushrooms or corn in its place. The flavor won't be identical, but they'll add texture and color. Canned diced tomatoes can be hard to find in some places, but there are plenty of substitute, and I've always found at least one to be available. Say diced fresh tomatoes, some other style of canned tomatoes, or tomato sauce. All provide tomato flavor, but the tomato sauce will lack the texture of diced tomatoes, so you'll need to be sure to use other ingredients that do provide texture. Now how about kidney beans? They add bulk and fiber. Other types of beans substitute easily, such as black beans or pinto beans. Another option would be to make Cincinnati-style chili and add some pasta. Spaghetti is the traditional one, but almost any type will work. Chili powder gives the chili its spice, but you don't have to specifically use chili powder. You can use some hot sauce, some minced hot peppers, canned green chilies, salsa, or even a package of taco seasoning. With all of these substitutions, the finished product won't be exactly the same as the original recipe. And if you had your heart set on chili, just like Mom made, you're going to be disappointed. But if you're looking for a hot, spicy bowl of something yummy for dinner, you might just create a new family favorite. Now let's talk for just a second about optional ingredients. Sometimes optional ingredients are listed as such. Other times, you have to figure it out. To continue the chili example, let's say the recipe also calls for shredded cheddar cheese. And as you read the recipe, you realize the cheddar is just for a garnish over the top. It sounds wonderful, but it's clear that it isn't necessary and doesn't have to be replaced. Now, a particular ingredient doesn't always fall into the same category when it comes to substitutions. Flour is a good example. For bread, flour is a critical ingredient. You may be able to substitute another type of flour, but you're going to need flour. In gravy, flour is a role player, thickening the meat juice. Cornstarch or arrowroot will work. A box mix that calls for greasing and flouring a pan can be made without the flour. The cake may be easier to remove from the pan with the flour, but it's not necessary. If you haven't done a lot of cooking from scratch, the whole idea of substituting can be a little daunting at first. What ingredients are absolutely essential? What role does a particular item play? But it's really not that hard when you give it a few minutes of thought. Most reference-type cookbooks contain a list of substitutes, but my experience is that they generally only list the exact substitutions, leaving you clueless about other items. With this framework, you can create your own substitutes for those other items with what you have available, or quickly conclude that maybe you'd be better off making something else. As long as you don't expect the finished product to taste identical, substitutions don't have to mean inferior. Instead, it's your chance to innovate and discover new favorites. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please be sure to subscribe in your podcast app. You can also tell your friends about it. And reviews are always appreciated.